Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 25 mini-series with the New York Yankees. And we are about to begin the 2025 to 26 offseason. This page right here really kind of tells you everything you need to know about the Yankees, and particularly the division graph. We got off to an awful start, a 1-13 start on the season. So we spent most of the first couple months of the season in the cellar in the American League. Once it got to summertime, the team really heated up, had some long winning streaks, I believe the longest of which was 9 games. And by mid to late August and into September, the Yankees were in first place in the American League East. But we ended up falling by 2 games to the Tampa Bay Rays, finished the season very weak, and injuries didn't help. Our number 4 starter and our number 5 starter, Sean Manaea and Marcus Stroman, both ended the season on the IL. Best hitter on the team, Juan Soto, as well. Shortstop Nick Ahmed, who was our best defensive shortstop and was a regular starter against left-handed pitching. And then Anthony Volpe basically missed the final month of the season, although he did make it back for game 162, the loss to Atlanta that officially clinched that we would not be making the playoffs. And Aaron Judge ended up playing in only 57 games, although he, like Volpe, was healthy right at the end of the season. So everything that could have gone wrong with injuries over the last month and a half or so of the season did. And we were unable to overcome it. So unfortunately, for the second straight year of this playthrough, the Yankees are not a playoff team. But before we start moving forward with the postseason and find out who will be hoisting a World Series trophy about a month from now, take a quick look at the Yankees' stats on the season. You can see after an excellent June, a very good July, and a strong August, really kind of hit the wall with a poor September. We ended up middle of the pack offensively, 8th in the American League in runs scored. We did have an excellent pitching team, though, 3rd in the American League in runs allowed. Pretty solid defensive team as well, pretty decent on the base paths. Should have been an 88 and 74 team, according to Pythagorean expectations. So although we missed the playoffs again, I do think we have the guts of a potentially solid team that should be in the playoffs next season and hopefully a serious contender for a championship. And we'll start off our roster review with the strength of the team, which is the pitching. Blake Snell came over and had an excellent year for us, 14-9. 3.26 ERA, led the American League with 244 strikeouts. He'll be back on top of our rotation next year. Garrett Cole, 13-8 with a 2.85 ERA, over 200 strikeouts. A nice season from the Cole train. And then Carlos Rodon had a healthy year, 13-9 with a 3.63 ERA. He did interestingly lead the league in home runs allowed, while also leading the league in the lowest BABIP against him. So that's kind of a unique combination there. The thing that's a little scary is that those 3 top starters gave us over 100 games started this past year, and they averaged well over 200 innings apiece between the 3 of them. So although we did have those injuries to the back end of the rotation that I talked about, with Snell, Cole, and Rodon all going to be in their mid-30s next year, is it possible that we're going to have the same kind of health from those 3? And I think you could certainly say it's unlikely that we're going to get the same type of performance from those 3 in terms of quality and quantity as we did this year. So even if the offensive players are more healthy and bounce back, we may be a little weaker pitching-wise. Clark Schmidt spent some time in both the rotation and the bullpen, 5-10 with a 4.34 ERA. He's still not all that expensive, pretty much a slightly below league average pitcher this year. If we have him back in the 5 hole next year, it might not be horrible. Will Warren, the 26-year-old, came up and went 1-1 with a 3.07 ERA. He is certainly in the mix to be on the roster next year. I think in a perfect world, I'd prefer that he not be in the rotation. Picked up David Bednar before the trade deadline to be our closer. Saved 14 games in 17 outings and had a 2 ERA. His one loss was a pretty devastating one a few days ago that was a significant one as the season really unraveled for us. I think it was either Cole or Snell who had a really good late game, and then Bednar came on and took the L in relief, which when you end up just a game out of a playoff berth because we were one game behind Houston for the final wild card and had won the season series against the Astros, definitely hurts. Bednar set to make some pretty significant money, over $10 million next year in arbitration, so I don't know whether we'll re-sign him or not. Phil Maton should be back. We signed him as a free agent last year. He had 20 saves for us, was the closer before we picked up Bednar. 7-7 record, 3.59 ERA, a bit above average in terms of his ERA plus, a bit below average in terms of his FIP minus, but still has a pretty decent pitching profile. Andrew Nardi should also be back. He is going to be arbitration eligible for the first time, but the left-hander put up a 3.77 ERA with 70 strikeouts and less than 60 innings pitched. Think he'll be back as a key lefty in our bullpen again next year. Connor Cook, the youngster, had a 5.45 ERA. I guess he's not really that young. He's going to be turning 26 shortly. Has a profile where he should be in the mix for a spot in the bullpen again next year. Taylor Rogers is going to be an interesting decision. He's pitched well over the year and a half that we've had him, particularly this year where he had a 2.91 ERA over 58 2/3 innings. He's making $12 million, although we were able to get the Giants to retain most of that contract when we picked him up. But he kind of knows what he is at this point, and he's looking for less than $2 million a year next year. So he would be a pretty reasonably priced left-handed arm out of the pen. My concern with him, though, is he's not even touching 90 on the radar gun anymore. And he was in the mid-90s at the start of this playthrough, so he's dropping off pretty quickly. Just don't know whether he's going to still be a positive player for us or not. Cody Morris, 3.21 ERA over 67 1/3 innings pitched, 28-year-old in the mix to be back next year. Jack Neely, we promoted him from Double-A right to the majors this year, and it didn't go particularly well. 12 home runs allowed and 25 walks allowed in just 42 innings. But he was pretty good at Triple-A Scranton. Only question with him is how many walks and home runs he's going to give up. Otherwise, besides those two things, there's no concerns about him. Scott Efros, up very end of the season when we had those injuries, was also solid in Triple-A. He still has option year left, so he'll be in the mix. And then Chris Bubich, left-hander, who we picked up as a minor league free agent signing, 3.36 ERA over 56 1/3 innings. Particularly if we decide to move on from Taylor Rogers, maybe that increases the chance that Bubich is back with us next year. He's likely to make a little over $2 million, though, so him and Rogers, similar cost. Bubich a lot younger. Rogers somewhat more established. Probably won't bring both of them back. The question is whether we bring either of them back. And before we get into the everyday players, we'll take a quick look at the guys who were injured. Manaea, we picked him up in a trade in late June. He was 5-2 with us, although the ERA of 4.94 was certainly not great. Coming back from shoulder tendonitis, I don't think that's going to be a huge issue. He's a solid major league starter. I think there's an argument to consider bringing him back as our number 4 starter next year, only looking for $8 million a year over 3 years, so we can probably get him for a little less than that. I think I'll look at who's potentially going to be on the free agent market, and if I'm not impressed with the opportunities available, that could encourage us to maybe bring back Manaea. I don't love Manaea and Schmidt as our 4-5 pitchers potentially, but it's also not horrible. Marcus Stroman is the guy that we'd like to move on from. Some of you suggested in the comments to the last episode that I just move on from him regardless and kind of eat the $18 million contract next year that he's likely to opt into. I'd still like to find a way to get out of some of that contract. Now he's 7-10 this year with a 4.48 ERA, below replacement level. So spending $18 million on him next year would be dreadful. But to the point of some of the commenters, it might also just be dreadful having a guy with 40 stuff pitching innings for us at the major league level. So I think my thought is, assuming that he's going to opt into the contract, might look to trade him right when the offseason begins. If we can get 80% of his contract off our books and not have to, or if we can get 20% of his contract off our books, I'd love to get 80% of his contract off our books. But if we can get even just a small portion of it off the books and not have to include a good prospect with him, I think I probably just bite the bullet, and doing that might free up a couple $1 million more for us to invest in somebody else. So it's hard for me to see a scenario where both Manaea and Stroman are back, and it's conceivable that neither will be. A lot will be dependent. If Stroman doesn't opt out and we can't trade him away, then there's really no way to bring back Manaea. I think we would need to invest the money that we do have to spend on somebody higher end than that. But if Stroman's gone, maybe we try to make Manaea our 5th starter, bringing him back. That would let us put Schmidt into the bullpen, and then we'd look to perhaps invest some of that money in a frontline starter if one was available. While we're here on the IL, Nick Ahmed was a minor league free agent signing, and he did fine for us. Hit .254 and 169 at-bats. A good, solid defensive shortstop. Issue is he's going to be out for another 7 months, so he should get a little bit of spring training action next year. Don't know exactly what he's going to look like. He's not looking for crazy money, $1.9 million. So there's part of me that thinks we bring back Ahmed because we like his glove so much, but not sure whether that will happen or not. And then Juan Soto had the best year of anyone on our offense. Unfortunately, as we talked about, he missed the final 2+ weeks of the season. Still led the American League with 100 walks and a .937 OPS, .273 average, 30 homers, 81 ribbies, added up to a 155 WRC+. Hopefully we can keep him healthy next year. He was on the IL twice this year, and unfortunately for us, his running mate in the outfield, Aaron Judge, was on the IL a lot more often than that. So turning to our healthy everyday players, and we've got more to talk about than normal here because we're still with the 30-man roster that we use in September. Carlos Narvaez only had 1 at-bat. He was our starting catcher in AAA Scranton. Brought him up at the end of the year, but unable to really get much in the way of playing time as we were competing for the playoffs. Rule 5 pick Ali Sanchez is a guy who I think we'll have back next year as our backup. Hit .282 in 177 at-bats. He's above average defensively. He's a good influence in the clubhouse, and only going to be making the major league minimum next year. So I think that was a good Rule 5 pick for us from the Pirates. The question is whether he'll be backing up Jose Trevino or somebody else. Jose hit .232, 8 homers, 36 ribbies. Another good defensive catcher, another guy that's really good in the clubhouse. He's looking to make about $4.3 million a year for the next 2 years at this point. Have to look at what the rest of the catching options look like, because there's also an argument, even though we kind of envision Sanchez as the backup to somebody, he could conceivably be a starter with his really good defense, the captain personality, and a bat that was not horrible this year. Jake Cronenworth probably won't be back. He was a salary that we had to take on the books for a year when we traded away Giancarlo Stanton a year ago. 251, 14 homers, 59 ribbies, pretty much a league average offensive player. Hopefully we can get more than that out of first base next year. The guy who we're hoping might give that to us is Austin Wells. Ended up hitting just 243, but did have 18 doubles, 18 homers, and 66 ribbies and 375 at-bats. 118 WRC plus when it all added up. A guy who can play a multitude of different positions. I think he's certainly in the mix next year to be starting first baseman or perhaps a corner outfielder if we end up wanting Judge and or Soto to have a little more time at designated hitter. Oswaldo Cabrera hit 203 and 182 at-bats as a utility infielder. He's still got an option year left, but he's starting this upcoming season to make more than the major league minimum. I don't think a roster spot is guaranteed for him, but it's certainly possible depending on how the offseason goes. Picked up Brandon Drury when we traded away DJ LeMahieu. Hit just 216 in 134 at-bats for us. Like his versatility to play a number of positions, like that he should have a respectable-ish bat, although that 59 WRC plus with us doesn't really indicate that it was. But he's looking for $11 million a year for 2 years. I think that's way too much for someone who we would envision as a utility infielder, so likely move on from him. Anthony Volpe kind of pivoted from short to second this year. Got the batting average up to 249, 19 homers, 33 steals, 117 WRC plus, and a 4.6 WAR. He'll certainly be back next year. The question is whether it's as our second baseman or our shortstop, and other decisions that we make this offseason will likely influence that. Nick Madrigal, minor league free agent signing that we made before this season, ended up hitting 335 in AAA and a respectable 273 and 33 at-bats at the major league level. Another guy with a lot of positive personality traits, versatility to play a number of infield positions, has some speed. He's a good contact hitter. No power, not going to draw a lot of walks, and not even going to necessarily generate a ton of extra base hits. But he's also a guy who, with a potential contract of about 1.8, 1.9 million next year, is a much more cost-effective potential option as a utility infielder than Brandon Drury, and probably a somewhat better potential offensive option given his excellent contact than someone like Oswaldo Cabrera. So Madrigal could actually be in the mix to be a utility player for us next year. Gleyber Torres made the pivot from short to third this year, and I think that's where we intend him to play next year. Hit just 250 this year, but still had 19 homers, a team-high 83 ribbies with the injuries to Judge and Soto. Was just an average offensive player when it was all said and done, but think hopefully he will bounce back a little bit and be a bit more productive than average next year. And then Oswald Peraza hit 235 in 514 at-bats. Kind of ended up for much of the year our everyday shortstop. He was playing short against righties, and then when the injury happened to Nick Ahmed, that kind of guaranteed even more playing time for Peraza. So below average offensively, still a 1.7 WAR. Like the glove, like the speed, the bat's respectable. Still making the major league minimum next year. He will be back with us. Question is he a starting shortstop or a starting second baseman, or is he kind of the top utility infielder we have coming off of the bench? Christopher Familia, left fielder, big year in AAA Scranton, hit .231 in 91 at-bats at the major league level. Did have 5 homers, though, but he did also strike out 28 times. Don't think he's a huge part of our future, but he still has option years, so he could be in the mix to be a 5th outfielder for us or somebody that we stash in AAA and bring up if and when we have some injuries. Everson Pereira going to have a excellent chance at getting some votes for AL Rookie of the Year. If he had been up the whole season, he could probably win the award. Combined for 51 homers this year between AAA Scranton and the Major League club, and hit .277 with 24 of those homers and 71 ribbies for the Bombers, 143 WRC plus. The only negative thing in his latest scouting report is that we thought his range was closer to 60. Now we're thinking it's only 55. With the lack of offense that we got from Trent Grisham in center fielder this year, we're hoping that maybe Pereira would be able to be a replacement there. I think in a perfect world, he's a good defensive left fielder or right fielder. He's pretty mediocre in center field, but with the bat that we think he has and the potential for him to steal some bases as well, he should have a spot in our lineup next year. I mentioned Grisham. He ended up hitting a .151 in 425 at-bats, 48 WRC plus, and below replacement level, even with his great defense. He's looking for almost $8 million a year. I think we're likely to move on from him at that level. Austin Slater came up briefly at the end of the year, a minor league free agent, 33 years old, in about a couple of months. Don't think he is a big part of our future. Probably won't be back with us next year. And then Aaron Judge, just a brutal season in terms of injuries. If we go back through the injury history just for this season, fractured rib, high ankle sprain, oblique strain, and then another high ankle sprain. Can see they all ended up being injuries that kept him on the IL for multiple weeks. When all was said and done, Judge, a year after leading the league in homers and ribbies, just 11 homers and 27 ribbies and 209 at-bats, hit just .215, and was a below-average offensive player overall. If he's healthy, I think he's still a big-time offensive force for us, but we've got to figure out a way to keep him healthy because we've still got 7 years at $40 million a year ahead of us with that contract. And it's only September 30th, and the regular season ended today, so things can change significantly over the next month or so. But it doesn't look like it's going to necessarily be a bumper crop of free agents, at least as far as everyday players. Matt Chapman, Tommy Edman, Rob Refsnyder, and Kyle Schwarber have the highest ratings according to our scout. I think Bo Bichette is also going to attract a significant amount of attention, but certainly not the greatest crop of free agents ever. That may encourage us to try to retain a few more of our players. We talked about catcher. I don't know that there's a huge difference maker here. Jorge Alfaro doesn't quite have the defense that we have right now with Jose. Probably a slightly better bat. I don't know that he's really the answer, though. Want to have a good, solid defensive catcher. Reese McGuire kind of fits the bill there. Another guy, an acceptable bat, not going to hit for much power. I don't really know how much of an upgrade he is over Jose either, so don't know that there's a clear move to make in the potential free agent class as far as our offense. But there's also going to be pitchers out there, and there are some starting pitchers who could help us. Griffin Canning, Dylan Cease, Nathan Eovaldi, John Gray. That's kind of the highlights of the at least most highly regarded starting pitchers. If we wanted to go for a bullpen arm, Devin Williams, outstanding stuff, is going to be out there. I think the big question is whether do we think, Dylan Cease is a big enough upgrade over what we could potentially be bringing back in Sean Manaea, that we would go to the free agent market for somebody like him as opposed to Manaea. Evaldi, I think 35, fragile, probably not a direction we would go. Griffin Canning certainly could work. Only 7-13 this year, and he's had ERAs above 5 for 2 straight years, but the way our scout rates him, you would think he could be a pretty decent pitcher. And his Sierras these last couple years have been pretty solid, so there's something to work with him. Maybe he's a better option than Manaea. As I mentioned, even with the pitchers, though, a lot is going to depend on what we think we can get for Marcus Stroman. If we can get him off the books, well, we're not going to get him 100% off the books unless we give up wacky levels of prospects. But if we can get any of his money off the books, if he wasn't going to make our roster anyways, it's probably a positive. And it will free up a little more money for us to play with. Right now we're looking at about $30 million. But certainly moving on from Cronenworth before his arbitration year, which we will almost certainly do, we'll either not give him an offer or try to trade him away. We'll open up another $10 million-ish. If we don't make an offer for Bednar, that's another $10 million-ish. So we could be heading into the offseason with well over $50 million to spend if we wanted to. I think the question is just, is there enough talent to spend that money wisely in free agency? And as we get ready for the playoffs to begin, the Guardians, Rangers, Braves, and Giants were the 4 top teams in baseball, or more accurately, the 2 top teams in each of the leagues. So they'll be having the first round byes. The Astros, the team that edged us out by a game for the final wild card spot, and the Braves, the team that ended up scampering past us in the last week of the season to beat us by 2 in the American League East, will be facing each other in a wild card series. And after those 2 teams just edged us out, and given the way those 2 teams have performed compared to the Yankees over the last 5, 6, 7 years at this point, I think I can speak for all of us Yankee fans when I actually just hope that an asteroid hits Houston or Tampa Bay while those 2 teams are playing in their wild card series. And the playoffs are now over, and in a rematch of the 1991 World Series, the Minnesota Twins took out the Atlanta Braves 4-1. So congratulations to the Twins. And as our offseason gets underway, in the least surprising news of the year, Marcus Stroman has executed his contract option year and will be responsible for $18 million for him next year. Still 2 to 3 months before he recovers from that torn labrum. No clue what he's going to look like. We are going to investigate potentially moving on from him shortly. Hal Steinbrenner, we've got a $360 million budget for next year, so that's positive. Reviewing of the season goals, he's happy that at 87 and 75 we exceeded his expectations, even though they didn't exceed ours. He liked the improvement in our bullpen ERA. Happy that we picked up Helmut Bernstein, the excellent prospect in international amateur free agency. Thinks we made some progress building the farm. Not happy with our draft record, although we've only done 2 drafts, so all of those players are still in the minors. Wants us to be a contender and winning a championship by 2028, so we've got 3 years left. Happy with our overall performance. Wants a winning record. Wants an upgrade at center field. Wants more attendance. And still wants us to focus on building the minor league system, developing more drafted players, and reaching the World Series. So overall, a decent evaluation. We let a lot of personnel leave our minor league teams this year. We will be looking to fill in those gaps shortly. Arbitration eligible players. We're going to have some interesting decisions to make. Volpe will certainly be back. Nardi will certainly be back. Clark Schmidt will probably be back. I'd love to have Bednar back. Just don't know how much we're going to be willing to spend on him. Although, quite honestly, with the relatively tepid class of potential free agents, maybe we do bring him back to be our closer. And then we've got some interesting decisions. Cronenworth, probably no. Rortvet, kind of depends what we do with Trevino. Madrigal and Cabrera, maybe one of them comes back. And then Morris, Efros, Bubic, and even Schmidt are all interesting decisions. And then even among the pending free agents, I think everyone except Grisham is someone for us to at least consider bringing back. And then Manai is a consideration as well. Right now, I think, and now would be a good time since we've simmed ahead a whole another month. Right now would be a good time to see if the potential upcoming free agents have changed. It looks like there's a few more players we think have 3-star potential, but that may just be because we've gotten more updated scouting reports on some of them. Could be players who opted out of contracts. Edwin Diaz, now going to be on the market in addition to Devin Williams. Brandon Woodruff, going to be on the market as well. That would be a pretty frontline starting pitcher. I don't love that he's going to be 33 and he's fragile in terms of his injury proneness, but 12-6 with 211 strikeouts, 3.22 ERA certainly is effective when he's healthy. I'm kind of intrigued by Griffin Canning, especially if that demand is really only $10-11 million. He's a little younger than some of the others. Normal injury proneness. I think I'd certainly prefer to have him in the rotation than any of the holdovers we've been potentially talking about, whether it's Clark Schmidt, whether it's Sean Manaea, whether it's Marcus Stroman. So I think that kind of encourages me to perhaps not make an offer to Manaea, because we should certainly have money to be competitive for one top-end pitcher if we want to be. It's just a matter of how high quality that top end really is. But with Snell, Cole, and Rodon, even if we find a guy who's a 3-starter, bump Rodon down to the 4-hole, that's a pretty solid 4-man rotation if everyone's healthy. And we just shopped Marcus Stroman, and even retaining 80% of his contract at the trade difficulty we're playing. Nobody interested, although I did notice that last time I was looking at trades for somebody, we weren't looking at regulars or veterans. That gives us a little bit of a better chance, but I don't think it's going to make much difference, so we'll bump it up to 85% and at least get some different information running it here. And there are some options at 85%, but you can see it's all bringing back players with big contracts, some of which are probably even worse than Stroman, since at least his is only 1 year left. I guess Evan White, who's headed to arbitration, would not be a bad one to bring on, because we would just not make an offer to him. So that's probably the path to go down rather than making a long-term commitment to someone who's also not very good, and in the case of all of these players except for Evan White, in their 30s. We're going to move on from Stroman anyway, so now it's just a matter of trying to get the best deal I can. I don't want to give up a big prospect, but I don't want Stroman on the roster. He's making a lot of money. He's going to be 35 soon. He's coming off of a serious injury, and he's just not that good anymore. So anything we save money-wise, given that there's really just this 1 year in 2026 left at this point, is a positive, because I don't want him on the team. So we'll try to get that number down as much as we can without giving up anyone who's a big part of our future. But we're going to figure out a way to move on from Stroman here to open up a little bit more money, but also another spot on our pitching staff for this offseason. And we've spent a fair amount of time offline trying to plan things out a bit. Still haven't figured out everyone as far as the arbitration eligible players, but we are going to, in terms of guys that we were unsure of, we're going to offer to Bubic, which means we're not going to make an offer to Taylor Rogers. We're going to let the aging lefty who's not throwing quite as hard move on and make an offer to the younger guy to come back. We're also going to make an offer to Nick Madrigal. I think I could see him being a utility infielder for us next year, particularly if we move on from Cabrera. And we're also going to make an offer to David Bednar for him to come back as our closer. He did a good job all in all last year, despite that disappointing effort the final week of the season. And think that he's as good or better than, and certainly more cost effective than, some of the options that we would potentially get on the free agent market. I think we're leaning towards letting Jose Trevino go. We've got a trade that we're thinking about, and I've also made a trade offer to get rid of Stroman that I'll hopefully be hearing back from tomorrow. But I think that we're going to make a couple of moves in the not-so-distant future. Also, we did get, since it's the first day of off-season, we did spend some time in the player development lab. Chase Hampton, top pitching prospect in the organization. We're going to try to increase his pitch movement. Helmut Bernstein, top prospect in all of baseball, working on plate discipline, number one pick from this last year. Carter Smith also working on plate discipline. And then Joseph Chiarotto, you may remember, we picked him in the second round. I believe we thought at the time that he didn't have the highest work ethic. His latest scouting report doesn't suggest that that's an issue anymore, but still a second-round pick that we invested a prime pick in, so we're going to work on his gap power. And then 4 major leaguers: Volpe, quality of contact; Pereira is running mechanics; Judge, strength and conditioning; and then quality of contact for Austin Wells as well. Really went with 3 of the younger players who are on our 26-man likely roster next year. And then although Judge is older, we've got so much money invested in him for so many years, and with the injury-plagued season he's coming off of, although it's a shot in the dark that will magically be able to improve his strength and conditioning, I think it makes sense to at least give it an attempt, given that we still owe him $280 million over 7 years, and we've got to try to keep him healthy and strong and in our lineup. And I mentioned that I kind of had another trade brewing in addition to trying to get Stroman off of the roster. And it's for a catcher. And as we talked about earlier, the market of catchers that are going to be available in free agency is not overwhelming. When you're looking for someone who's got decent defense along with a decent bat, best combination is probably Christian Bethancourt. who's still only average defensively, but should have a potentially average-ish, maybe a little better major league bat. But I'm not really excited by him. But I'm also not necessarily thrilled with bringing back Jose. We kind of know what he is. He's a below-average offensive player who's solid defensively and great in the clubhouse. Looking for about $4.5 million a year for 2 years. And there's an option out there that's intriguing to me. It's not on the trade block. It's just a player search that we found looking for, and I can make it a little less, little smaller list here, but looking for an above-average defensive catcher who we think is just kind of average in the three main offensive categories. So again, there's some superstars on this list. Clutchman, Francisco Alvarez looks like he could be great. Harry Ford of the Seattle organization. Sean Murphy would be great, but Atlanta's not willing to trade him for anything close to reasonable. Contreras and Quiro from the Brewers are both interesting, but Miguel Amaya is the guy who's got my eye out of the Cubs organization. He's been in the majors for parts of 2 years now, and he's been an above-average offensive player, and we look at his profile, and he should be average-ish to slightly above average offensively. He's an above-average defensive catcher as well. He's making the major league minimum, so he's very economical. He's coming off of a year when he hit 306 with a 140 WRC plus. So although I think realistically he's a pretty average offensive player looking at the ratings, maybe he's a little better than average. The big concern is his fragility. I don't love bringing on a 26, soon to be 27-year-old guy who's already fragile. But I think his glove is as good overall as Trevino's and arguably better. His bat is certainly better. He costs less money. The issue is that he's not cheap to pick up in a trade. In a straight-up offer, there's only 4 guys in our organization that we can trade for him. And the one that I'm thinking about sending there is Spencer Jones, the guy who allegedly has been the holdup to some of the big trades that the Yankees could have made in real life this past offseason. 24 years old at this point. I think he could still be a solid left-handed power hitter, but you look at where we think his ratings could go, and you look at the fact that he just hit 220 with 20 homers in over 500 at-bats in Double-A at the age of 24. And although he may be a really good prospect in real life, doesn't seem like in this version of the game he's going to be a big-time prospect. And Amaya's only a little older than him, and he gives us a nice, solid defensive catcher who we're going to have making the minimum this next year. It's possible he'll make the minimum the year after that, or else he'll be in his first arbitration year, so it still won't be a crazy contract. And Amaya is a guy who, if we bring on board right now, we can potentially try to put him through something in the development lab to either maybe improve his batting a bit or work on his strength and conditioning as well. So it's an expensive trade, but I just don't think Jones is someone who looks like he's going to be a big help to us in this playthrough. So we're going to go ahead and make this deal. And the only thing I did do was get them to throw in a tiny bit of cash as well and can still get the deal done. So we've got a new catcher coming over, Miguel Amaya, giving up one of the better prospects in our system to bring him on board. But as I said, I don't think Spencer Jones is going to be a big-time impact player for us in this playthrough. And Amaya becomes our starting catcher, backed up by Ali Sanchez, who, as I mentioned, I think he could be a starter if we needed him to. So given that it's conceivable Amaya may be losing some time with that fragility, I think it's a pretty interesting combination for us behind the plate for 2026. And since, at least according to our latest scouting report, it doesn't show that Joseph Chiodoto has that low work ethic, which we kind of wanted to test in the development lab, we are going to remove him from the list. And that's going to allow us to figure out a training program for the young catcher, Amaya. Strength and conditioning is certainly an option. I think we're going to try that one. I know there's certainly no guarantees, but if we can bolster him a bit and maybe improve that fragility, if we're thinking about building around him for the rest of this playthrough, which is, probably just another few seasons, I think it's worth taking a shot at it, especially with all the injuries we had last year. So we're going to put Amaya on a strength and conditioning program just like Judge. Maybe with the fact that Amaya is materially younger, he might have a higher chance of success when all is said and done. And we've heard back on our offer to get Marcus Stroman off the books. It wouldn't get him completely off the books. He's opted into that $18 million contract, and we'd still end up paying half of it next year, but it still would free up $9 million for us. And who knows what Stroman's going to look like post that torn labrum. He already doesn't look that good right now. I think I'd rather have an extra $9 million to use in free agency and taking on players in contract this offseason, especially because we don't have to give up too much with him. We still have to add one more player into the deal, and they're asking for some of the top players and top prospects in our organization. But they're also asking for minor league first baseman Keston Hiura, who we picked up as a minor league free agent this past year. Had a monster year in AAA, but he looks like kind of a 4A guy from what he's done over the course of his career at this point. Below average, slightly offensive player, and slightly above replacement level overall. He's going to turn 30 next year. He's a guy we picked up for free. Well, not free, but minor league free agent, so free as far as using a roster spot or having him impact our finances. And then we also have to include some middling to low-end prospects. 26-year-old center fielder Grant Richardson, 24-year-old pitcher Justin Lang, 24-year-old pitcher Yorlin Calderon, and left fielder Joel Mendez. We have to take on Evan White's contract in return, but he's headed to arbitration, so we're not going to spend $9 million a year on him. We're just going to not make him an offer in arbitration and let him move on. So ultimately, we're going to save $9 million next year, get Stroman off the team, and I don't feel like we're really giving up anyone who's a big part of our future to get it done. It's possible he'll have a fine year with the Angels. If he does, more power to him and the Angels. I don't want to risk having him back next year. So we're going to add Hiura into the deal, and we are not going to mess around. We are just going to go ahead and complete that trade. And Stroman is gone. Feel we've got plenty of leadership even without him. Arbitration eligible players now include Evan White, and I guess he had a 0 offer from the Angels, which we're just going to keep on him as well. So we've still got a few other arbitration eligible players that we need to figure out, but I feel pretty good that we have moved on from Stroman. Not perfect that we're going to be retaining $9 million of it next year, but that money will be off, and LeMahieu will be off after this coming season. And I don't know what happened with Giancarlo Stanton. Did he maybe retire? He couldn't have just retired, but I don't see him listed here anymore. I think he retired. He retired. Oh my gosh. Huh. What did he end up doing last? He didn't even play this past season. Oh, he sat back in his recovery and he had some surgery before the season started. And then his career ended as of September 17th and was released by the Padres. So, interesting. Well, that takes that obligation for the next few years off of our books as well. So, even better. We won't have Stanton lingering for another year after these guys. We've got the retentions from Stroman and LeMahieu for next season. And then after that, we're kind of out of the retained contract business now. We need to hope that Judge and Cole and Rodon in particular don't turn into contracts that we need to be trading away over the next few years. But at this point, we're clearing the books a little bit. And we finally made our decisions around our arbitration eligible players, and there's 5 players we're going to end up not making offers to. We tried to trade some of them away, see if we could get any value at all, and essentially they have no value at the trade settings that we're playing at. We can take back a monster contract to get rid of any of them, so would rather just make no offers to them. We decided we are going to make an offer to Oswaldo Cabrera. Think that his contract would be tradable if we need to trade it. So ultimately, Schmidt, who could still end up as a 5th starter for us, the lefty Bubic, the lefty Nardi, and Bednar, who we think will be our closer, 4 pitchers that we've made arbitration eligible offers to, and then starting infielder Volpe, and potential utility infielders Cabrera and Madrigal, making offers to those as well. None of the pending free agents, except for some minor league free agents, are going to get offers, though. I think there will be more attractive options for a number 4 starter than Sean Manaea on the free agent market. So we're going to not try to lock him up now. Slater, no. Drury, the money he's looking for, no. Don't need Trevino now that we brought on Amaya. Not going to bring back Rogers since we're bringing back the lefties, Nardi and Bubic. Grisham just can't hit. And then Ahmed, coming off of the torn labrum. A little more torn on him, but I think we're going to let him hit the free agent market. I don't think he's going to be looking for that much more than what we could get him for now, and would rather see what the whole pool of potential infielders looks like, especially since we are going to bring back the much younger and likely healthier Cabrera and Madrigal. Potentially losing a bit defensively, not having Ahmed on the team, but that's a choice that we've decided to make. So I think now it's time to run through the rest of the arbitration period. We've already made a couple of trades. We've got, importantly, Stroman off the books. We've got Amaya as a starting catcher for us next year. We've got a lot of guys that we're not making offers to, so we're ultimately going to have more money available than that $31 million when we get through this arbitration period and start preparing for free agency. And our arbitration eligible players have started to sign. Schmidt, Bednar, Madrigal, and Volpe back. The fans excited about Bednar and especially Volpe, so that's positive. Taking a look here at the front office, our fan interest remains over 100. Still need to figure out what's going to happen with Bubic and Nardi as well as Oswaldo Cabrera, but we are locking up the arbitration eligible players. Also, some of our minor league free agents as well. Got a trade offer from the Orioles looking for Chase Hampton, one of our best pitching prospects, and Jared Cerna, as well as Christopher Familia. Judd Fabian is borderline interesting because of the power. If he was a left-handed hitter, I think he would actually fit us pretty well. But honestly, Familia's the same age. He's a lefty. A useful-ish potential bat as a fourth or fifth outfielder against right-handed pitching. Not quite as good defensively, but especially given that we also have to give up some other pretty useful prospects, particularly Hampton, to bring Fabian on board. I think we'll pass on that offer from our division rival. And Cabrera, Bubic, and Nardi are all signed, as well as some more minor league free agents. We also ran through our latest international scouting practice. Again, since this game was started before the first and now the second patches were out, our international amateur free agent pools are ridiculously good, and our draft pools are ridiculously bad. Hopefully that will be much more well-balanced by the time we begin our long-term playthrough, which should be early April. And I had mentioned earlier that I thought Everson Pereira might get some Rookie of the Year votes, but was unlikely to win it given that he only spent about half a year in the majors. But apparently that wasn't enough to keep him from earning a Gold Glove award in right field, with Judge being injured so much. A bit surprising, given that he only played 62 games there at the major league level, but was covering a fair amount of ground and was above average in terms of his defensive efficiency. A little bit surprising, but hey, it's an honor for a guy who we think is going to be an important part of our future. So happy to see Everson win the first Gold Glove of his career. And probably not surprising given the disappointment of a second consecutive missed playoff year, but no other honors for the Yankees as far as the awards this year. Thought that perhaps Mr. Soto might still have a chance at winning another Silver Slugger, but not to be the case this year. Rookie of the Year was Tampa Bay's Carson Williams, and Pereira finished second in the voting with 12 first-place votes. Probably the fact that he only played 85 games didn't work in his favor. Carson Williams for Tampa Bay, 147 games. Looks like he likely played a pretty solid defensive shortstop. Yeah, well above average zone rating and defensive efficiency for him. He was pretty brutal offensively. Well, in some ways he was brutal. The 200 batting average and the sickly leading 235 strikeouts were pretty brutal. He did, however, hit 34 home runs, and that helped him still put up a 102 WRC plus and a 4.3 WAR. So hard to argue, despite the interesting year that Williams had with some of those crazy stats, that Pereira would have deserved the Rookie of the Year with just 321 at-bats, playing a less important defensive position, but he still put up a pretty close, almost as much WAR, despite his limited playing time. Looking at the big awards, the AL Cy Young Award, Tariq Skubal of the Tigers, 19-5, 2.62 ERA. Garrett Cole and Blake Snell both received votes for our Yankees. In the NL, Framber Valdez of the Giants, a unanimous winner. 11-13 record, but did have a 3.11 ERA. Led the league in games started, innings pitched, had a 5.8 WAR. A little surprised that he's a unanimous winner with those stats. Maybe it was a bit of a down year for some of the pitchers. Yamamoto followed up his 16-2 rookie year with a 16-9 season. Based on the way he performed in his official major league debut earlier this morning in Korea, feel like you could argue that he's a bit overrated, but clearly an extremely small sample size, and clearly he was an absolutely amazing pitcher in Japan. AL MVP Evan Carter of the Rangers. This one's interesting too. The number's not overwhelming. 307 average, 21 homers, 80 ribbies. But he did lead the league with a 411 on-base percentage, 156 WRC plus, and a 7.5 WAR. And Michael Harris II of the Braves, 336 average, 29 homers, 80 ribbies. Led the league in batting and slugging as well as WAR. Named the MVP here in 2025. And we've made it to the start of free agency with some of the higher paid players. We ended up moving on from like Cronenworth and arbitration, and the fact that we have moved on from half of Stroman's contract. You can see we're going to have over $60 million to spend. Now we've only got 30 guys on our 40-man roster, so we've definitely got some holes to fill. Most notably, would love to add a big-time starting pitcher. Would love to add a good arm, another good arm for the bullpen. And then center field and shortstop are both areas where we could look to upgrade if there's someone interesting out there. I'm guessing there's probably not going to be international free agents. Maybe there's a reliever out there. Whoa. Mauricio Serna. Oof. Everything except the fact that he's looking for $27 million is kind of interesting. We'll request a scouting report on him, but I'm guessing if we're going to be spending that kind of money on a potential starter, probably do it for someone who's a little more proven. Nobody else really jumps off the page there. Major league free agents, Devin Williams, the closer, Hunter Harvey, Raisel Iglesias, a lot of closers out there. Giolito, John Gray, Dylan Cease, a lot of the starting pitchers we expected to see. Not a necessarily incredible crop of position players when Tyler O'Neill and Yandy Diaz are considered the top two on the market, or two of the top free agents on the market. Griffin Canning is available. We had talked about him before. I think that he could be an interesting option for us. Certainly wouldn't mind adding a big-time reliever, a Diaz or a Williams. But with the fact that we have already signed Bednar, we don't really need a closer, so we could probably go a little lower end for the relievers. So thinking about the starters, we already talked about Serna coming over from Cuba. It's only low scouting accuracy, but it seems like his stuff is not incredible, so probably not the direction we'd go. With Woodruff and Cease and even John Gray all looking for an excess of $20 million. It seems to me, and they all have 4 pitches, it seems to me the value play here might be Griffin Canning. Still above average stuff, a 4-pitch arsenal. Maybe slightly above average movement, above average control. He's been a below average pitcher over the course of his career by ERA plus and FIP minus. So maybe he's a little bit of a mirage where he doesn't quite pitch up to the ratings he has, but that could also be why he's a bit of a bargain. John Gray, looking for more money, the stuff not quite as imposing, plus movement, plus control. Over the course of his major league career, he's been pretty average as well. But he does a lot of years in Colorado that likely influence that negatively. Dylan Cease has the stuff. Another guy with a 4-pitch arsenal, well above average fastball and slider, throws in the high 90s, plus movement, below average control. Certainly above average over the course of his career by ERA plus and FIP minus. Reasonably accomplished pitcher looking for big money. And then Brandon Woodruff is looking for more than anybody. Great personality, a little older. He's going to be 33 before the season starts. He's fragile physically. Has been a well above average pitcher over the course of his career, though, by the ERA plus and FIP minus metrics, and just the fact that he's got a career ERA of around 3 tells you something as well. Woodruff's certainly the most accomplished, but given that we kind of just need an upgrade from what we had last year with Stroman and Minaya in the 4-hole, Canning is still reasonably attractive to me. Now, we've got enough money that we could go for 2 of these guys and move Schmidt to the bullpen, which would really strengthen our rotation. So then it's a matter of Canning would definitely be one of the guys in the mix if we went for 2, simply because of the economics of it. But we've got enough money to go after 2 of these guys if we want, and we'll still see what Cerna's scouting report comes back at. If it turns out that his stuff is a little better than we think it might be when we get to know him better, he's got a lot of real positive things going for him with the exceptional control and well above average movement. Also a lefty. I believe the other 4 guys are all righties. So there's some interesting options for us out there among the starting pitchers. If you've got thoughts on which direction you'd go, would love to hear them in the comments. Looking at all the batters, a handful of 3-star type players, so no superstars out there. Ahmed looking for a little more than he was asking us for. Certainly could try to have a reunion with him. Tommy Edman looking for significantly more money than Ahmed. Pretty solid defensively, still has some speed, a good contact hitter. But overall, a below average offensive player over the course of his career. We could certainly bring him on board. Ahmed, we know. Tim Anderson, another guy, good contact, not a lot of power. And then Bo Bichette, not really quite a shortstop, quite honestly, with those ratings, but probably the best bat of any of these guys. Could always try to bring Bichette on as a third baseman and pivot Volpe back to short and Torres back to second. That's an option as well for in the $10 million kind of range. So there's options to think about as far as the infielders. Center field, I think, is the bigger concern because there's not a lot of natural center fielders here. see guys with some big fielding ratings, but those aren't at center field. Edman, decent range, decent error, but not really an upgrade compared to what we think we've got out there with Pereira. Tyler O'Neill, another guy, he can play the position. I don't know that he's better defensively than Pereira. Jock Peterson, certainly not as good in center. Rob Refsnyder, not as good in center. Benintendi, not as good defensively in center field. I think we're going to be able to say that about most of these guys. Our old buddy Trent Grisham, looking for a lot less money than he claimed with us. He was looking for $7 to $8 million when we checked with him. So that actually might be an option. As bad as the bat was, if we decide that the best option is to be starting Pereira in center field, maybe we try to bring Grisham back to be a fifth outfielder for us, potential defensive substitute. That could work. You can argue that we need another outfield bat anyways. We've got Soto in left, Pereira in center, and Judge in right at this point. But if we think we might play Austin Wells at first base, it means that we've got the lefty Familia, who we talked about, who could be a outfielder off the bench, but we certainly have one hole in the outfield, maybe have two. Tyler O'Neill, solid bat. $16 million is a lot of money. Not all that dissimilar from Conforto a year ago, and we know that didn't work out well. Jock Peterson's got the pop in the bat and can draw some walks. Another guy who's an above-average offensive player. Refsnyder, not the same home run kind of power, but still has been above average offensively the last year and a half or so. Kyle Schwarber is probably the biggest name of the bunch, and best power, best ability to draw walks, all adds up to consistently above average offensive play. He's really more of a DH, and depending on how Judge's strength and conditioning training goes, we may want him to be spending a fair amount of time in that DH spot. So I don't know that there's a perfect choice in terms of thinking about an outfielder, just like there's not really a perfect choice when we think about the shortstops. But I'm definitely intrigued by some of the starting pitchers. I think I make an offer to Canning. I think the question is whether we also make an offer to a Woodruff, Cease, or a Gray. Because it's conceivable we could get two of those players signed for $30 to $35 million a year, which would really upgrade the 4 and 5 spots in our rotation. Arguably, some of these guys could move ahead of Rodon into the 3 spot. Still think Snell and Cole are our 1-2, but it does give us a lot more depth if what I talked about at the beginning of the episode happens and we don't end up getting 100-plus games from Snell, Cole, and Rodon this upcoming year, which is certainly possible. So I think there's some interesting options for us to improve this team, and we've got the money to do it. It's time to get these Yankees into the playoffs, so if you've got a thought or thoughts on what we might want to do to get the team there, I'd appreciate those. I mean, even Lucas Giolito, could spend around $10 million on him. You know, pair Giolito with Canning, and we get 2 starters for about $20 million. And then that leaves us a lot of money to get a little more creative with some of the options as far as the batters. Although I think from what we're seeing on the market, Pereira is probably going to be our starting center fielder next year, which makes me think that perhaps a reunion with Grisham and just get the really good defense might make sense. Manuel Margot would be another guy with a similar profile. Probably not quite as good defensively, but probably slightly better offensively. Same kind of money. Although we're getting a little low on lefty bats right now, too. Soto and Wells are really the only two lefties potentially in the lineup. So, although we don't love Grisham's bat and we wouldn't envision him as an everyday guy, it does give us another left-handed bat off the bench, which wouldn't be the worst thing either. The only thing I can tell you for sure is that we will not be having a reunion with Joey Gallo. Until our next episode, if you've got ideas on what we should do, would sincerely appreciate it. Until the next time we see you, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.